We'll make do. So,
Yeah, you're not missing much looking at me. So,
well, you're a good looking guy. What are you talking about?
hey, I didn't. I have my LED lights on, radiating my frequencies above me in
Yeah,
Oregon. So it's like, and I did not powder my bald head. I'll leave it there.
yeah. We call it follicularly challenged, not bald. I'm getting there myself, actually. So, took a little,
Yeah,
but
that's how I started when I was about 22 with a full head of hair.
yeah. So, yeah. So, yeah, it seems to go. So my father he wore a baseball cap his last 10 years. And so until he moved in with me, I didn't know that he didn't have any hair left. So everybody had a good couple of weeks off for whatever it is that you did. Uh, I hope it was uh, peaceful and we're raring to go now, right? So we're going to do great things this year. So, so I think I don't remember, Chris, the last time you were with us. No, we're able to give CME credits now. Um,
Wonderful.
I don't know if that was available the last time you did it, and we'll send you if you want the video, and we'll send you the participant list also. So
That'll be wonderful. No, and I have a whole series of talks. So assuming that you all want me back, I love to share, as all of you do. That's why you're in your society.
right,
It's all about iron sharpens iron, just all becoming a little bit better. And I graduated in '92, and Doc, I know you precede me, Dr. Clearfield, but um, I mean the things we did not know back then, and now we're like, wow, okay, so it's more complex than we thought it was,
yeah.
and that's just the tip of the proverbial iceberg of the nuances of science and trying to keep up with the magnificent human body and living organisms.
The one that really worries me is that, um, and I was considered a pretty good at it. Is when we get a thyroid test. First of all, we didn't know what to order, except for we knew about the TSH, and all I knew was that if it was high or low, I had to send them to an endocrinologist, and I didn't even know what the high meant low and the low meant high. So God knows how much we missed.
Oh,
So
and it continues. I have a good medical doctor friend that actually lost his license to work in Oregon because he was doing measuring free T3 and factoring that in and reverse T3. And the medical board did not like that. The endocrinologist said TSH, T4, TSH, T4. Anything other than that, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
yeah, well,
Yeah, that's sadly so. Hello, hello. I'm listening. Dr. Barisik is here, listening to your conversation.
Well, yes. Well,
yeah.
great to hear you. Great
Well,
to hear your voice.
the
Yeah,
chime
so
in.
that's sadly so because there's still many endocrinologists. They're still stick to TSH. They don't want to order anything else.
Yeah. And
Um,
today's talk incorporates a little bit of sick thyroid syndrome as just part of the conversation of when we starve ourselves with intention, does our body consciously know that we're doing it on purpose? And so I'll have a little thyroid conversation, but I have a whole thyroid lecture that I've given for Institute for Functional Medicine before. I used to educate on the male hormones, the adrenal, and the thyroid for them.
All right. Well, let's see when you're available, Ken.
Yeah, then I have another lovely talk on the benefits of fertilized egg yolk. Of course, we know an unfertilized egg, but the moment we get fertilization occurring, all kinds of magnificent biochemistry starts occurring,
Mhm.
and its ability to lower myostatin, improve irisin, help with the anabolic resistance. So yeah, we let's see how this one goes. And if you folks want to invite me back, we can talk about all kinds of fun things.
All right. So
Interesting.
we like everything thyroid and anything a little bit quirky like that. We were good to go. Okay.
If you have me, you have Corky, that's for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Is
So
that Fortitropin, Dr. Chris?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's good stuff.
Corticotropin from Myos MD. Um, they've been in the vet business or the side of things. They have some 300 veterinary hospitals, and they have an interesting canine study where they basically did the knee replacement on the dogs, and they looked at the disuse syndrome, and there was no atrophy for the dogs taking the fortitropin, whereas there's, of course, we would expect tremendous atrophy when you're, basically, healing up. And yeah, it actually helped with protein synthesis in a Berkeley study in humans. 18% increase in protein synthesis within 21 days, and no change in diet or lifestyle in older population. So
This is oral, right?
that's oral, just fertilized egg yolk has, I think, 8 patents. And yeah, so feel free to email me. And I don't have my email here, but I could put my email on the screen real quick here. I love sharing, and right now I'm dealing with my younger sister with a metastatic breast cancer, and I unfortunately have become somewhat of a nuanced expert on inflammatory breast cancer that has metastasized. So that's my email from 1996, naturalmedman@hotmail. So anybody's welcome to email me. And I know what I know, and I do not know what I do not know. So I love learning from colleagues as well. We're all stronger together.
Agreed. So Dr. Nario, tell us about your exciting adventure coming up this year.
Oh, well, I'm going to be starting my fellowship with Andrew Weil Integrative Medicine in University of Arizona in Tucson. So that's going to
congratulations.
be, oh, thank you. That's going to be a really exciting, I guess, venture for me, because it's been one of the things that I've always been planning to do. And of course, I will give you updates as soon as we can. We're going to be branching out over there.
You're going to let them know
Hopefully,
about us, right?
Yep. We're going to spread the good word.
You're going to have them all on Tuesday nights at 5 o'clock on here, right?
We're all going to be crunched up in one screen.
That's right. So,
And we're going to make it part of the assignments.
okay.
But yeah, we're still going to be here, and definitely we're going to keep on going.
You'll be telling us where we've been going wrong all this time. So
Well, I gave a
We'll
lecture
teach
with
him a thing
a
or two.
graduate of Andrew Weil School back in 2001, and her name was Wendy Kahutsu. And Wendy Kahutsu, medical doctor at Oregon Health Science University Local Medical School. And we were speaking to the 4th-year medical students. My pitch was, 5 years ago, the people that sat in these chairs, you folks dwarf the diagnostics, the therapeutics. I bet 5 years from now, unless you're a perpetual learner, that's how they're going to feel about you. But Wendy Kahutsu from the Andrew Weil School of Medicine, or the fellowship there, said, "I'm going to tell you something your professors didn't tell you. Antibiotics do not work." And she said it with a definitively straight face. Here, I'll repeat it. Antibiotics do not work. I'm going like, "Oh, Wendy, where are you going with this?" And she's been put the caveat, without a competent immune system. And she gave an example of an immunocompromised person, whether it be HIV or whatever, full-blown AIDS. And antibiotics just don't have the wherefore to move the needle by itself often. But that was her philosophical volley to them to think about things a little differently than what think one thing solves all problems. So I'm assuming that came out of some of her training from Andrew Weil.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Some of I've been reading the curriculum already, and they're really into just plain old natural stuff. They don't know about rapamycin. They don't have all of these new stuff that's coming, peptides. I'm sure there'll be some of it there, but the curriculum is straight up integrative medicine, if you look at it.
Yeah. And I have a good medical doctor friend, and he was in charge of diabetes at Providence Hospital here in Portland, where I did some of the residencies for my students when I was a dean at the Naturopathic University. And he still to this day will not recommend a single supplement. He says diet and lifestyle, diet and lifestyle. And so he's more naturopathic, so to speak, than myself, or more philosophical. Like I blend, I have a DEA number. I write for, I do the CTs, MRIs. I do whatever is necessary to help move the needle and meet the patient on how deep of a hole they've gotten themselves into. And I often give the example of a tow truck. Every once in a while, you veer off the road, you're in a ravine. Thank goodness for the tow truck.
Okay. So, those of you who don't know, thank you all for coming back. Hopefully, we're going to have some very exciting talks this year and some really good knowledge. And Dr. Quinn, afterwards, maybe you can opine if Dr. Tano's not on about what's going on with our research group. But tonight, to kick off the new year for us, we got Dr. Chris Meletis, who's been with us before. Dr. Chris is a prodigious, accomplished educator and physician. He's an international author and lecturer. He believes when people are educated about their body is the moment when change begins. He's written over 200 published scientific articles. In 2003, he was named Physician of the Year by the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians. And he's been the driving force behind 16 community clinics to help the poor and underserved in the Portland, Oregon area. So, Dr. Chris, we're honored to have you. As we'll have the didactic part is CME credit, and in the emails every week you can get the links for that, and I'll put the link in a little while, a couple of times for tonight also. You get 2 AMA CME credits. It's $20. No, it's $30. Sorry, it's $30. 2 AMA CME credits. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Chris Meletis, and Chris, take it away.
Thank you, Doc. I really appreciate the invite. Nice to meet you all. And it's wonderful to have forward-thinking colleagues. I'm going to share some things that I have found interesting. And we've all seen the trend for Wegovy and Ozempic and some of the other GLP-1 drugs. And as with all things, there's good and there's bad. And as I mentioned early on, I prescribe medications. There's a list of side effects. And we know there's some side effects with those drugs, but we're not going to talk about side effects today, except for the fact that whenever we do rapid weight loss, whether it be a bariatric surgery, another fad diet, you all might remember when HCG injections were all the rage. Do an HCG injection and eat 500 calories and lose a massive amount of weight. But the question is the quality of that weight. I wanted to start with the 2017 Korean Journal of Physiology and Pharmacology picture here that shows a electron transport chain and the citric acid cycle, also known as the TCA cycle. And you can see with our patients which are overweight, obese, that we have a decrease in the efficiency of the Krebs cycle. We have decreased beta oxidation, as you can see with the red arrows going downwards. We have increased reactive oxygen species. And we have a shift in things, including an increase in mitochondrial DNA mutation. As we all know, we have our nuclear DNA, our thank you, mom, thank you, dad. And then we have our thank you, mom, for our mitochondrial DNA. And we all know there's that epigenetic consideration of, sure, we have genetics, but diet and lifestyle pull the trigger. But then you can see with individuals which are exercising, uptick in the TCA Krebs cycle, uptick on beta oxidation, which helps, of course, with the browning of fat and burning of calories, and onwards throughout the electron transport chain. So just a glimpse of the things we learned back in undergraduate, and then when we went to our degree programs, we learned all this biochemistry, but it had little to nothing to do with our applied clinical practices. So the trend, of course, with obesity, which we're very familiar with, but I always like to share slides which are self-evident because they give us a little quotable quotes for our patients, because we know the science, we learn the science, but then we translate the science into English. And as a result of translating that science in English, our patients will become appreciative of why we're telling them what they're doing. And I live here in Portland, Oregon, actually Beaverton, Oregon, right by the Nike campus, right by Intel, lots of high-tech folks, people that are smarter in their fields than I can ever imagine being. And a lot of them, as we've all experienced, have then taken that same intellect and intellectual acumen and then done their Google searches and their PubMed searches, and they come in virtual experts in their field, at least they believe so, because they don't have the clinical experience, and they come in talking about all these biochemical pathways and so forth, and meeting them where they're at. But ultimately, I often will challenge those same individuals with little stones on my desk. I have little glass stones, and one says peace, and one says harmony, and one says health, and one says wellness, and so forth. And I will often put my hand on my desk with as though it was a camel's back, and I put 3 stones on my back of my hand, and I have on the third stone, my hand falls to the table, the consultation table. And I said, so which one broke the camel's back? And they said, well, the last one. And it might be peace, it might be health, it might be, happiness, whatever the stone says. And I said, well, let's do it again. And so I do it again. And I said, well, which one broke the camel's back? And this time it was faith or something. And like, no, it's the total burden. And we all know this. But so once again, that concept and the beauty of the medicine of how did we get to where we are? So as we can see, obesity has grown tremendously. We see it, the diabetes, metabolic syndrome, sometimes what's referred to as type 3 diabetes or Alzheimer's disease. But that yo-yoing really kind of course, messes things up. And the mitochondria come at play. We have lean body mass, we have detoxification issues. But when we lose a large quantity of fat, what happens? We're losing a lot of toxins. But with Wegovy, the GLP-1s, or any other diet or bariatric surgery or whatnot, we end up with some challenges. So rapid weight loss leads to sarcopenic obesity and an uncompensated toxin release. And so now imagine if we're on a diet, whatever diet led us to our problem with needing to lose weight, and that now we're going to portion and cut a percentage of that diet out with the GLP-1 or bariatric surgery or any other restrictive diet. So we're now getting less micro and macronutrients, less glutathione support, less whatever. And now, but we're releasing all these yesteryear toxins and forever chemicals, and that becomes a problem. So what I like to do in clinical practice is addressing, enhancing the mitochondrial function, and addressing euthyroid 6 syndrome, which will be kind of a fun few slides. And then we're going to talk about mitigating muscle loss with rapid weight loss and why overweight the risk for regaining weight. And that one's interesting. So I'm overweight. I've been a desk jockey forever, and I'm working on my 19th book. And so I can say, I tell everybody I've proven a couple of things. I have tremendous endurance when it comes to gluteal muscles being squished. And I'm a glutton for punishment of just sitting in front of my desk and having musculoskeletal issues. But being overweight leads us to a higher level of myostatin. And having an elevated level of myostatin increases our potential to regain weight, which is very, very interesting. We'll go into a little bit of a dive there. I have a much longer talk that if you folks want me to do in the future, I can. And then we have micro and macronutrient deficiencies. They say that 75 to 80% of us are low in one or more vitamins or minerals. Obviously, vitamin D is a big one, but Linus Pauling back in the 70s said, there will be a day when vitamin C is much like flour and sugar on the shelf, and you will buy it by the pound. We haven't seen that yet. But once again, as human beings, we don't make vitamin C from glucose, though we have the 4 enzymes, one of them shut off. But our cat does when it gets stressed. Our dog does, but we don't. And guinea pigs, fruit bats, and the front-fined bluebird do not either. So it's kind of like, okay, well, we're already kind of cutting our diet. And once again, it's not that health promoting to start with. So we had to kind of figure out how did our patients get there. We want to increase the odds for our patients to be well. Being a good Greek as I am, I love riddles. And there's 2 sphinxes. You may know the Egyptian sphinx. It sits there in Giza. And then there's one that protected the city of Thebes with a B. And to pass by this protector of the city of Thebes, there was a riddle. Which creature has 1 voice, yet becomes 4-footed, 2-footed, and then 3-footed? And many of you know the answer. It's humankind. We walk on 4, we walk on 2, and hopefully we don't walk on 3. And now, of course, with the advent of all those little walkers, well, there's actually probably 6 legs, the 4 legs of the walker, and then our 2 legs. So kind of interesting to see how do we prevent that. And so one of the compelling sides of things is, heck no, I won't go, much like the herring with the frog, and the frog has its hands on the cartoon firmly around the neck of the herring. So this gentleman personifying the fact that, no, I'm not going to accept that chronological age being my biological age. I want a younger biological age. And so what's interesting is for lean individuals, non-obese individuals, the muscle is the largest organ in the body. And of course, I learned back in the day as a naturopathic physician, it was the skin. Well, the skin's the #1 detoxification organ. Of course, we all think the liver or the kidneys. But then we look at the metabolically active tissue, and we know we have to support the mitochondria. We know that things like NAD drops precipitously. By the age of 40, we have about half the NAD levels within our skin that we used to. And now, there, of course, you go to your dermatologist, or maybe even in your practice, you'll tell your patients take niacinamide because it actually can help against certain kinds of skin cancers. So once again, interesting when we learn our biochemistry. I started my life in conventional medical school. I went to 2 years of allopathic medical school, and then I transferred into naturopathic medicine because my younger sister was dating this highly testosterone fellow, which had a strong opinion, so much so that she eventually bailed on him. But he was, I think, in my life to get me to transition to naturopathic medicine. And my one class in conventional medical school that involved nutrition was the proverbial underwater basket weaving class, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was a college graduate. During college, we did not have a single Scantron, fill in the bubble on exams. We had to pontificate and think and so forth. And so when I was taking my class in nutrition, it was the same time I was in biochemistry class and physiology class, all that same semester. And in pharmacology class, we were learning about nicotinic receptors and that side of things. We were learning in physiology the role of NAD, and same thing in biochemistry. So I asked my nutrition professor, could I, this was between 88 and 1990, could I just practice nutrition or have a large part of my practice? He says, yeah, if you want to lose your license. This was before Andrew Weil started his schools and programs, and Deepak Chopra and Dr. Oz and all those folks. And I'm like, okay. So I come back from the summer, and my sister's dating this fellow, and I said, well, if you like nutrition so much, why don't you become a naturopathic physician? And he double dared me with his highly testosterone over muscle bound body and says, I said, oh, you're talking about chiropractor. He says, no, naturopathic. And he ripped open a phone book. Remember those days? Phone books and telephone booths. And so it's like, okay. And I said, okay, well, there's 2 schools there. And he said, well, you're just blowing smoke. You don't want to do it. But of course, I applied, and here I am, and ultimately became the dean of that school. So individuals over the age of 60 are classified in the lowest third, or 50% more likely to die of all mortality. So our muscle does matter. But now we have these people that are losing weight, and they're losing a disproportional amount of muscle. In general, individual results will vary. And are we increasing their risk? And so once again, we don't want to have increased mortality. And then, of course, muscular strength is significantly and inversely associated with the risk of death of all causes. British Medical Journal, 2008. So they've kind of known it for a while, huh? And so we have our skeletal muscle, largest organ in the non-obese individual. And it has all of these biochemical placements. Of course, it increases glucose uptake, has AMPK, helps with, of course, fat oxidation. But we're going to see on a couple slides further on in the presentation, and they create myokines, which you're very familiar with, and exerkines, which are actually hormones made by our muscle. But when I graduated, okay, I said the muscle, with some good proprioception will keep you upright, keep you ambulatory, so you have a good gait. But, I never thought of my muscle when I graduated in 92 or until more recently as a biochemical shift for the entirety of the body. I have some fun graphics from the peer-reviewed literature coming up. Serves as an endocrine organ, secretes hormones such as myokines. Myokines secreted by the skeletal muscle communicate between muscles, liver, adipose tissue, brain, and other organs. In fact, we all are very familiar with the gut-brain connection. In fact, my 18th book is called the MMM theory, the microbial mucosal milieu theory. It's free on Amazon Unlimited, and it's 254 pages speaking about the microbiome of the various parts of the body beyond the GI tract, the uterus, the prostate, potentially the blood, the brain, onwards, the bladder even, and all from the peer-reviewed literature. But what's interesting is, so we got the gut brain, but now there's muscle brain, and there's even a link between sarcopenia and losing muscle and increased risk of Alzheimer's and dementia. So we kind of look at these muscles and say, okay, well, we're losing weight, the scale is moving, but are we truly successful? Because the scale reads a lower, or is it the quality of the weight? And we all know the answer to that question. So we want to safeguard from that ripple effect, or like, hey, I got the number, I fit into my outfit okay, but have I set myself up for the bigger fall down the road, literally and figuratively, because of course, without muscle, we're more likely to take a tumble. So from the peer-reviewed literature, we see age-related sarcopenia, skeletal muscle metabolic decline, and we see inflammation. We're all very familiar with it. term that wasn't not coined that long ago. And we have mitochondrial dysfunction, chronic conditions, changes in adipokines, and even telomere attrition. And so we all learned back in the day that, well, we want to have our little zipper on our chromosomes at a certain length so that we're healthy. We don't want them too long. We don't want them too short. So we do resveratrol, or we do another product out there like an ashwagandha extract. But now we're seeing that with sarcopenia, neurodegeneration comes to play, including Parkinson's. Well, of course, with Parkinson's, we need strong muscles anyway, because we're starting to lose the neuromuscular function. But we're also seeing that without the muscle, we're also having a shift in a diet and absorption and hormonal factors. So after the age of 30, people lose about 3 to 5% of their muscle mass per decade. So even this is little statistics I share with my patients. So even with my 30-year-old patients, I'm saying, so what are you doing for your muscle? Oh, I'm doing good. Of course, they can flex their muscles and they're very toned. But I'm saying, but if we don't continue to work on that and put you on a workout wellness program, much like a diet, for a lifetime, we're going to not be successful. And of course, once we hit 60, which I'm in that circa, it's like, okay, well, yeah, what happened to my big muscles? I used to be able to easily beat my 2 sons in arm wrestling. I still can, luckily, but I have to work a whole heck of a lot harder. So getting old is not for sissies, and many of us already know that. So when we look at the aging associated with the changes in muscle and structure, and you can see the arm here in the right-hand upper corner of a 25-year-old, and then we see a 75-year-old. If we don't do anything, that's kind of how it ends up. And the girth of the arm may not be that much different, but the quality and quantity of the muscle is dramatically different. And so we see the skeletal muscle and that sarcopenia and that attrition, that inflammation, low-grade inflammation. And what we call it now is geriatric syndrome. That's one of the terms coined in the peer review literature. But you don't have to be a geriatric chronologically, because biologically, you can go ahead and do that. And I tell my patients the difference between biology of age and chronology of age is, don't we all know somebody that's maybe 85, 90 years old? They're sharp as a whip and can run circles around the youngins. And the youngins have been playing on their computers and their Xboxes, and they can barely make it around the block without being out of breath. I have 2 couples, and one couple, he was a physicist and she was a chemist. They're both in their mid-80s. And until recently, when the husband took a tumble on the sidewalk from some slippery leaves here in Oregon, he was doing 10,000 steps a day in his mid-80s. So a younger biological age, so super sharp. He was a physicist with an interest in crystal structures. And she, of course, broke a glass ceiling before glass ceilings were known. And she was a chemist. And both of them did extensive walking. And they both made a point of walking their flights of stairs. And he did 50 flights of up and down every day. But recently he broke his femur, and he had a disuse syndrome from having to be pieced back together like Humpty Dumpty with a femur. And of course, then we put him on that substance I mentioned early on called fortotropin, and to help mitigate that, but we're of course also supporting the mitochondria as well, and supporting their NAD levels or CoQ10 or whatnot. So when we look at the use it or lose it concept, true, we can, if we don't use it, we'll lose it. That adage is very true, especially when it comes to behavioral exercise activity, strength, but also immobilization. I had a hernia surgery in 2020, lucky me, right in the beginning of COVID, June of 2020. That was a fun experience. My family left me 3 hours away at a hospital, and they were told, you cannot come in. And they drove back home, and they came back and picked me up. So welcome to COVID and hernia surgery. But I had disuse syndrome from the fact is I had to lay low for a while the mesh healed. So many of us are desk jockeys by the nature and all the charting requirements. But then we get an injury, whether it be a knee, a hip, we get a replacement, we have to support that as well. But then some people get truly ill, either hospitalized ill, or they get ill at home and they end up with problem. And when we see a chronic illness or an acute illness, it can lead to something which we're very familiar with, euthyroid 6 syndrome. And it's an interesting, it's a non-thyroidal illness syndrome, and it changes your thyroid function numbers. And as we were talking before we started on our call today, it's present in about 75% of hospitalized individuals. But let's imagine we all were wise enough to try to avoid going to the hospital unless we have to, because we know there's nosocomial infections, and we hopefully will have a good hospitalist on staff when we get emitted. And so, but 75% of individuals that are hospitalized or worthy of being hospitalized, they're sick, but they're sick at home, or chronically ill, they have euthyroid 6 syndrome. And this can also occur from deprivation of calories. So the extreme weight loss program also can mirror and mimic euthyroid 6 syndrome because it's going to cause a diminished level of T3, particularly free T3, and an elevation of reverse T3. So the most common hormone pattern in a euthyroid 6 patient, so any of our patients that all of a sudden they were ill, they had an intervention, or they just slowly but surely limped along and got better, but they have low energy, they have all the classical signs of low thyroid, but they have particularly low T3 and low free T3 and a low or normal T4. And the TSH levels are low or normal. So if we're only measuring TSH and we're only measuring T4, we say they're euthyroid. But as we know, when we prescribe levothyroxine, that's a 1x. So we have 100 micrograms of levothyroxine. Well, how much does that equate to in terms of cytomel or T3? And of course, we know T3 is 3 to 5 times stronger. So it's a much smaller dose. And so now if we have what, as I share with my patients, T4 is like 1x on your car's RPMs. That's the idle. It's good, but you have to convert it in your periphery to T3. But if it preferentially due to low iron, low selenium, low zinc, goes to reverse T3 or starvation diet or any kind of diet. I think we've all, well, most of us have done a diet, lost weight, and then plateaued. That's because our body in its infinite wisdom of survival, back to the days of the cave people, I was like, okay, great, I'm injured. The weather is terrible. There's a famine going on. And so we went into these quasi-hibernation states, but that's not good for healing. That's not good for detoxification. And so this euthyroid 6 syndrome comes to play tremendously when people are going tremendous dietary changes. And so it also causes a shift in the browning of our adipose tissue. So all of a sudden, if we don't have a sufficient T3 to activate thermogenesis and uncoupling electron transport chain of ATP synthesis and brown adipose tissue, we're not going to get the full bang out of a weight loss protocol. And here's a visual which kind of speaks volumes. Of course, we have our mitochondria working here, and we have our blast furnace, but the T3 in particular goes to the mitochondrial DNA, which you can see here, the number 3. And there's receptors on our mitochondrial DNA for T3. But once again, if we're only measuring TSH or only measuring T4, we don't know where the patient's T3 levels are or where the reverse T3 levels are. And if you think of musical chairs, T3 versus reverse T3. Well, T3 is 3 to 5 times the metabolic activity. Reverse T3 is 0x. And so once again, what's competing to the mitochondria to help with electron transport chain and so forth. That's why a lot of our patients start presenting with hypothyroid-like symptoms, or what we call subclinical hypothyroid, and they're fatigued, they got muscle problems. So imagine you're a Lyme patient, or maybe you're Epstein-Barr virus patient, or you're sadly enough, your long-haul COVID patient. Where are their thyroid levels? Once again, that comes back to your mitochondria and supporting with things like NAD precursors and CoQ10 and whatnot. And so we see a little blow up that picture. And once again, the T3 going to the mitochondrial DNA, affecting the mitochondrial DNA expression. But when we measure ourselves on the scale and say, well, I have a good BMI, I think we've all seen the skinny fat patients. So success on the scale does not equate healthy. We all know that. We have people that are super thin and they got terrible lab work and they're not doing well and their gait is terrible and they're shuffling. This is the second or third time in the year that they've taken a fall and a tumble. So efficacious weight loss drug use can actually lead to undesirable effects. Forgetting the well-known list of the GLP-1s, constipation, gastroparesis, and all this, we have these issues. When we lose weight, all of us, we mobilize lipophilic compounds stored in our adipose tissue. Chlorinated compounds, DDT, the metabolite of DDT, which is DDE. Remember, it was banned in 1972, PCBs. And then we go ahead and look at the organochlorine compounds and the carbon fluorine compounds, so forever chemicals. And they have tremendously long half-lives. So don't we need to have our mitochondria working for the cytochrome pathways, for phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification? So when we start having our thyroid slow down because we're doing a successful weight loss program, we're in now a intentional starvation mode, we're ending up slowing down our mitochondria across the board, and we need to support that, as well as, of course, doing some good detoxification. In the naturopathic world, still over 60% of naturopathic physicians do not support the detoxification pathway sufficiently when a patient's losing massive amounts of weight. But we're just not only have today's toxins. I'm sitting in my home office. I happen to have technology that measures how many parts per million that I have of fluorocarbons, of volatile chemicals. But I'm always running my filters. But if I go to any other place, or I have a new car, or a new office, or new vinyl floor, or whatever, there's more chemicals today. And then we have to deal with yesterday's chemicals. And that's where the epigenetic burden, or the allostatic load, becomes excessive. So we got the skinny side of things. But once again, if it's not toned and we don't have the muscle, we end up with problems. And so the rapid weight loss, the sabotage is we can become too weak. And though we might be looking very thin, like this fellow, just by chance, a stock photo that I am using, but GLP-1 agonists and bariatric surgeries and other rapid weight loss programs rob the muscle disproportionately, and that ends up with problem. And when we lose that active metabolic tissue, we, of course, lose that higher basal metabolic rate for after we're done with the active weight loss process, and we're trying to just go into a maintenance program. And when we lose our muscle, of course, we lose our insulin sensitivity and blood sugar regulation to a very large degree as well. So if we all think about going to Minnesota or Michigan in the winter, and we're wearing our summer garb, or I'm wearing my Oregon garb, most of the time I can wear my summer clothes here in Oregon. It doesn't get that cold where I live. But now if I go someplace cold, what's going to happen? I'm going to shiver wearing my Oregon attire. And that shivering is what? Thermogenesis, our body trying to save our proverbial bacon from freezing and turning into an icicle. But once again, if we lose our muscle, we won't have that ability. So once again, protecting the muscle, vitally important, and supporting the muscle side of things. So Dr. Kumar, practicing endocrinologist in New York City, is quoted in Healthline, sarcopenia affects the elderly population. To a degree, the answer is that yes. If you don't do anything about it, your chronological and biological age will be same. And typically is associated with aging. However, rapidly losing weight with GLP-1s like Ozempic and Wegovy without the proper diet and exercise can also lead to sarcopenia, says the endocrinologist, sometimes referred to as the skinny fat. So now, of course, the plate on the right-hand upper corner kind of looks somewhat healthy, but now even if you're on a healthy diet and you're cutting your calories, your micro and macronutrients aren't going to be there to help with the detoxification and maintaining your skeletal muscle because of their decrease in caloric intake. And with that comes a decrease in protein and other things as well. But of course, unless they have us, then of course, we're going to create a more well-balanced program to allow fertile ground for protecting against the muscle loss and so forth. So for the love of biochemical pathways, it could also be titled Trigger Alert. But you're saying, oh, this isn't very complex, Chris. I got this one. And we look at how, of course, our muscle, skeletal muscle, and we look at how it impacts our mitochondrial biogenesis. And some of you may already use things like pyroquinoline quinone, PQQ, to support mitogenesis, or maybe you're using some resveratrol. But the fun picture comes over here when you look at what happens from a mechanism of sarcopenic obesity and its association with endogenous metabolites. So we got the obese individual. Sadly enough, I am more in that category than I would like to be. And then we got the sarcopenic individual, and you can see all these different pathways. So of course we go through male menopause, andropause, and menopause. So some of our anabolic hormones drop, but then we also start having more inflammation. And we know that when we have elevated C-reactive protein, we actually increase our leptin, L-E-P-T-I-N levels, which causes a decrease of adiponectin. And so there's just all these counterpoints. And if we only knew this when we all were in these classes learning about these biochemical pathways, so the vast majority on this chart I did not know, and were probably not even existent in 1990. I think we knew about vitamin D and testosterone. I give you on that one. But it's like, wow, so there's just so much we didn't know, but now we do. And as you can see, it's in the peer-reviewed literature. So the Adipocyte 101, and just a refresh, So as we're talking to our patients, brown fat cells are involved in thermogenesis, the process of heating production. And there's numerous mitochondria containing uncoupling protein, the UCP1, allowing them to generate heat. Great. We want to brown our fat, and we want to brown our white fat to trigger that. And so this is where the popularity of the cold plunge comes in. So if you want to stop your heart and or lose weight and trigger your mitochondria, jump into a 32-degree polar plunge in your bathtub every day and voila. But certain chemicals like irisin and norepinephrine also help with browning. And interesting, we'll get to irisin a little bit. I have a much more extensive talk on this. But when elevated myostatin levels, which happen with aging, with obesity, with inactivity, a sedentary lifestyle, irisin levels drop. And so we don't brown our fat as well. And so that's why obesity sets you up for regaining your weight in part, not only because of the mitochondria and thyroid dysfunction, but because the irisin levels are not sufficient because of elevated myostatin levels. So then we got thermogenesis, and we got the beiging of our adipocytes that can, of course, generate heat. So we want to help our patients with that browning, but it takes, once again, energy and mitochondrial function in order to do that. Some more fun graphics out of the peer review literature. And when you look at the peer review literature and how much it's really expanded in the last 5 to 10 years on nutrition and nutritional biochemistry, it validates everything we've known all the way along. So this was a 2023 excerpt out of a PubMed article, and we see white adipocytes in the browning beige, and we start seeing the changes. And over here, you can see the little UCP1 expression in white cells, white fat cells, and then we have a high expression thermogenic. Remember back in the day when ephedra, mahuang, synephrine from orange peel, those were all the rage to help cause a thermogenesis, of course, with lots of sequelae, because it has some alpha adrenergic impact. But it's like, okay, but look, we got cold exposure and environmental stimuli. But once again, we need to brown ourselves when it comes to getting that fat tissue going. And a better look at dormant adipocytes, cold exposure, diet, exercise. This is where things like the fertilized egg extract, which we can talk about after the fact. But you see, look at the changes that occur when we start browning our fat. We start seeing a decrease in a lot of the risk factors we're concerned about. And of course, now you look at the triglyceride levels, I think the vast majority have seen elevated glucose pattern, elevated triglyceride levels. That's not by coincidence. And of course, either metabolic syndrome and diabetes. The other time I see elevated liver enzymes or elevated cholesterol levels, the first thing I'm thinking about, all things being equal, is how's their thyroid? Because when I have a hypothyroid patient, their liver enzymes are often elevated, and their cholesterol and their lipid panels are askew. And we dial in their thyroid within normal reference ranges, and lots of those numbers start balancing out a little bit, kind of interesting. And we start seeing the glycolysis and the thermogenesis occurring here. Once again, peer review literature. Then we go into the young person. Once again, think biological age, not chronological age, because we have people that are young and youthful, but they have old bodies and they have old person's health issues. And then we have often older people that are really doing great for themselves. They're the proverbial Adonises of their age category, but with sedentary lifestyle, welcome to being desk jockeys, and AI and computer technology and the comforts of the world. And we start seeing sarcopenia, decrease in functional function. We see mitochondrial DNA mutations. We see increased apoptosis, impaired autophagy. We also see impaired mitophagy, so the mitochondrial side of things, and impaired biogenesis, all because we're becoming more sedentary and we have sarcopenia occurring. So by addressing the sarcopenia and supporting the mitochondria, we can start pushing our biological age the other direction. So many of you are familiar with the NAD decline with age, and up to 65% drop in NAD levels between the age of 30 and 70. So the supplementation with NAD precursors like nicotinamide riboside or even an IV of NAD precursor could be helpful. And we want to help with the physiology. A fun statistic. We know that magnesium, there's some 300 to 600 enzymes. And now the literature points towards 600 enzyme pathways, which are magnesium dependent. Well, NAD, there's 500 biochemical pathways which are NAD dependent. So if we knew nothing about science, we're just talking to the lay public, And we're saying, well, we can help support 500 different enzymatic pathways by supporting your NAD levels, which have dropped over the course of time. Kind of makes sense. We want to support those NAD levels. That same graph looks very similar to a melatonin drop, which of interest enough is a very powerful antioxidant. And during the COVID era, you might recall there was an article that came out showing that melatonin actually, and this is on PubMed, you can Google it, melatonin actually helped quiet the cytokine storm. It wasn't a highly published study or promoted study, but it's like, oh, melatonin, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and all the other wonderful benefits of melatonin. And what else do we see with that similar kind of curve? Nitric oxide levels dropping also, and that's circulation through the 60,000 miles of blood vessels from the neck down. We have some 100,000 miles of blood vessels in our brain. So they did a study, and I love quoting current literature. This one is not current literature. It is 1953 Lancet, referenced twice. They looked at conductors and drivers in 1953 in London, and the conductors did a whole lot better on their health because they were walking around. In 1953, the drivers are our computer desk jockeys, the Dilberts of the world. And they found that there was much more, twice as much coronary heart disease and syndromes from the drivers than the conductors because they got their miles in. So, of course, my big investment this year has been 29 cents a day for a piece of software on my phone that tells me one thing: have I met my steps for the day? And so yesterday was supposed to be 6,300 steps because it was started January 1. And today they gave me a break. It was only going to be 3,500 steps. And then the guilt of the software program of you have succeeded, gold star, like when we were kids, or you have failed epically, which has happened already this year for me. So here we go, flash forward. Now this is the drivers, not the conductors. So we have, of course, the ATP and the mitochondrial function, the sarcomeres and ATP consumption. But this fellow has it figured out, in my opinion. If any of you are familiar with Steven Sinatra before he passed, he was the integrative cardiologist, and he lectured on the big stage at A4M conference right before I did in Florida, probably about 12 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. And I usually don't listen to talks right before I give my talk. It was on the big stage, so they had to mic me up, and I had a little Britney Spears, Michael Jackson microphone on me. And he was talking about grounding. He called it, of course, earthing. This fellow has figured it out. He's cold plunging, he's breathing fresh air, and he grounded himself all at once. Good for him. So, and brave for him as well. He seems to be having fun. I'll just leave it there. So skeletal muscle insensitivity. There's a condition as we get older, and as we get sarcopenia. It's called anabolic resistance. When we think anabolic resistance, we start thinking, well, anabolic hormones. This is actually where our skeletal muscle cannot take up amino acids as well as they used to. So they're still circulating in the bloodstream, unless, of course, you're on a starvation diet. Then, of course, we're going to worsen that. And so we want to help with anabolic resistance. And that's part of that is by dropping your myostatin levels and supporting your mitochondria. And so the commonality to decrease physical activity and muscle contraction between these conditions is that it is associated with anabolic resistance. So the desk jockey, the heavy person, the sedentary person, which often have been underactive, now are ending up with more anabolic resistance. So they have trouble building the muscle. And then if they lose the muscle with rapid weight loss, they end up with dire straits. So the muscle as an endocrine organ and all those lovely things. When even a decade ago, when I looked at interleukin 6, I said, terrible, terrible, terrible. Now we know there's two sides of interleukin. Too much interleukin 6, not a good thing. Too little interleukin 6, not a good thing. So you think, okay, well, patient with rheumatoid arthritis, SED rate is good, CRP is good. The interleukin 6 is elevated. That maybe is why they have an inflammatory process. But now we see the myostatin impact, the iron side of things, which helps with the burning of the fat, and all these lovely chemicals, of course, insulin, the GLP-1, and it's throwing off our muscles in a very significant way. So once again, our muscle affects our brain, our muscle affects, of course, our blood vessels. And of course, we know nitric oxide and NAD levels paramount for healthy blood vessels and heart function. And I don't know where that came from. another couple fun human beings enjoying the plunge. I'm not sure. There we go. And we got skeletal muscle. And we see here from a 2024 Journal of Gerontology and the impact of muscle on all these biochemical pathways. So just tell our patients they need a walk. They need to be accountable. They need to have a pedometer on. They need to be moving. And muscle actually helps. And it was Nietzsche that said, you want to be thinking expansively and clearly, you must be exercising, you must be walking. I don't usually quote him, but I did just quote him. And it's neuroprotective. So all our patients with Parkinson's, maybe they have an apolipoprotein 3-4, we're going to want to support that pathway by going ahead and helping with exercise. So exerkines. Exerkines are, of course, a kind of myokine. Since the discovery in 2000 that muscle contraction releases interleukin-6, the number of exercise-associated molecules has multiplied tremendously. Once again, if you're a new graduate, great, you know this stuff. If you're old like me, don't know it because there weren't even the words being used at the time. But the exerkines have potential roles in improving cardiovascular disease, immune system. That's why we tell our patients with cancer and immune diseases, walk, exercise. And you might remember a gentleman, Patrick Quillen. He was quoted, worked for Cancer Treatment Centers of America, that 41% of people with cancer die of starvation, not from their cancer. And so helping the diabetes, the obesity, and making sure our patients stay active with any chronic disease, vitally important. So from the process of muscle loss, and one of the things which you're very familiar, especially since many of you are osteopathic physicians, is if we have decreased nerve innervation to any area, well, of course, we're going to have atrophy. We call it a brachial plexus issue, 3-4, cervical spine. Of course, you're going to not only possibly have carpal tunnel-like syndrome, but you can have atrophy of the muscle. Likewise, if you have a lumbar spine issue, you might have gastroparesis or a sluggish bowel. Andropause, menopause, elevated cortisol levels, thyroid dysfunction, lower growth hormone levels, of course, highly regulated. I think sometimes a little too overly regulated. All our problems. Andropause, of course, you have to have that serum level below 300. But I asked the philosophical question, if a gentleman used to be 800 on their testosterone and now they're 301, is he not a fraction of the man hormonally that he used to be? And might that maybe 400 would have been low for him? Of course, we know with stress, we have cortisol that we know that's a catabolic hormone. And so, of course, that's going to be at odds for people wanting to load on muscle or do the healing process. That's why we tell our patients to de-stress or use L-theanine or GABA or whatever our preferences are. The anabolic resistance, remembering as we get older or we've been sedentary or we have a disuse syndrome, the anabolic resistance is not a hormonal issue. It's a amino acids not being taken up by the myocytes within the body. And we have disuse syndrome. Welcome to, of course, either being sedentary or having an injury. And then we have poor nutritional status, gut health. So I have a patient, she's 64 years old, and she ended up falling from a ladder. So she had osteoporosis already. She had already left osteopenia. She was in osteoporosis. So she broke everything on her left side, left arm, left wrist, ribs, everything that pieced her back together. But then she was in a disuse syndrome phenomena. And now her problem is, for whatever reason, she has very fast bowel transit time. So she eats and she goes poop. She eats, she goes poop. She eats and she goes poop. Poop's a very medical word. I think we have an ICD-10 code for poop, but I think it's a little bit more differentiated than that with lots of modifiers. And that was a joke. But now she takes supplements and they just run through her. She takes her medications are running through her like little torpedoes, or the torpedo from the Yellow Submarine of the Beatles. So it's like, okay, well, she's not assimilating. And so she's becoming more frail, prematurely aged, skin and body alike, and she's having a real hard time. So once again, supporting that gut health to assimilate is very important. And biological versus chronological age. This couple over here can probably run laps on most of the teenagers that have been sitting in front of their Xboxes or Nintendos. Sad. So this is a graphic from True Niagen, a company I'm an educator for, but it points out about NAD and NMN. So NMN can't cross the cellular membrane. NAD has to be broken down as well to cross the membrane. nicotinamide riboside not only process the pathway, but the Brenner pathway through NRK1 and 2 are induced with physiological or psychological stress. And that will, like a Hoover vacuum cleaner, suck in the NR and support, then be eventually converted to NMN, which cannot otherwise cross the membrane and make NAD. Remember that aging process. One of many things, along with all the other cofactors and substrates for acetyl-CoA, down through citrate, down to cis-acatinate, through the pathways down to succinyl-CoA, and all the way around the Krebs cycle. We have to have those nutrients, and I'll go over that in a moment. And so here's our mitochondria. And I have a saying, it's on my last slide, all ships in the harbor rise with the tide. So when you support the mitochondria, you support all these functions. So even though we might be targeting weight loss and skeletal muscle, we have to be supporting the mitochondria in order for everything to work. Two patients of mine, actually, strangely enough, have retinitis pigmentosa, and there's a mitochondrial component to it. Many of you have seen an elevation in the quantity of people with fatty liver. There's a mitochondrial component of that more often than not. A non-alcoholic fatty liver, that of course is. Cranial nerve number 8 and hearing changes, often mitochondria related. And so we start seeing all these correlations with, once again, the mitochondria, thanks to, once again, mom's genetics. So when I do a intake for my patients, I ask family history. I usually delve into the mom side quite a bit because I want to know how energized mom was. I want to know how energized mom's sisters were, maternal grandmothers, because that mitochondria are determining your nuclear DNA, the 46 chromosomes function. So a flashback, this is from US Biotech, courtesy of US Biotech, which is borrowing their graphics. But we have our glucose, which will, of course, we're carbonation. And we see every place that citrate to cis-acatinate to isocitrate to alpha-ketoglutarate. Well, you need vitamin B3. You need to make sure you have iron. You have the same thing here. And so you see the substrates and the nutrients necessary. This is, of course, an organic acid test where we can actually measure where are we getting stuck. And invariably, there's a common theme where you'll start seeing one star, another star, all of a sudden you're just like, wow, the same things are low. And for example, over here with glucose to pyruvate, eventually down to acetyl-CoA, we see, okay, well, we need B vitamins, we need magnesium, we need lipoic acid. And we'll see the same thing when it comes to protein digestion. And we'll see the same thing when it comes to the isoketocaparate on fat digestion. You'll see the patients scoring again and again and again, the same substrates being insufficient unto their unique biochemistry. So as you can see here, lots of B3. One of my areas of focus as an educator is vitamin B3. It's like, wow. So back to that nutrition class in MD medical school. Well, the thing that got me hot to trot on nutrition was that nicotinamide receptors and NAD. And we now know that in order to convert tryptophan into niacin, which is simple B3, whether it be niacin or nicotinamide, well, it takes 60 milligrams of tryptophan to make merely 1 milligram of niacin. And then it takes some 8 different biochemical pathways to make it into NAD. But why would the body convert 60 to 1? Because that's how important NAD is. And so once again, supporting biochemical pathways. I love CoQ10 as well. I love other, of course, mitochondrial support. So you can see here the peer review literature. We have Skeletal Muscle Energy Metabolism Journal. We have clinical evidence for targeting NAD therapeutics. We have exerkines and resilience to health. And we have mitochondrial dynamics and exercise physiology. And we have age-related loss of skeletal muscle as a measure of overall health and well-being and atrophy. So lots of literature here. And once again, I can send you all these articles, just email me. And we see here the mitochondrial dynamics with all of these things. We have our cardiac muscle, cardiomyocytes, we have our skeletal muscle. Of course, we have our smooth muscle of our bronchi and intestinal tract. And these mitochondrial dynamics play a role, but once again, exercise plays a role across the board. Hence, mitochondrial dynamics and exercise physiology, 2019. So we need to be exercising. And so showing a patient this article, for me, in my practice, I have a lazy Susan, and I just literally rotate around my monitor and say, this is what exercise will be doing for you. So they're thinking, well, it's going to help my heart. It's going to help. No, it's going to help all of the above. And so that's gets them really motivated. And then I hold them accountable based on their apps that I have them place on their phones or other devices, or their Apple phone or their Apple Watch or their Aura Ring or whatever. So exerkines have the potential role in improving cardiovascular, metabolic, immune, and neurological health. And there's these tissues, the adipokines, the myokines, the cardiokines, they're all contributing, but we have to be exercising. And a body in motion stays in motion. A body at rest stays at rest, kind of basic physics. So from True Niagen, there are some educational lipids. All it is scientific literature. You can actually get access to all of this. And it actually talks about white papers and supporting the muscle and all the applications of NAD in the body. But the goal here is to get enough NAD building blocks across the membrane to support healthy NAD levels. And when it comes to peer review literature, you always, in my clinical practice, I like to follow the science. There is something, and we started the early conversation with Andrew Weil and going back to the basics of his institute and training of good diet, good lifestyle, exercise, good sleep, all those basics. Those basics are the foundation that has kept society and our ancestry alive for the millennia. But then we look at things like nicotinamide riboside, 1,000 milligrams, 3 weeks, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study, and 12 marginally overweight individuals. And they looked at how it decreased certain inflammatory markers and how it increased the muscle NAD levels. And then in 2020, another 1,000 milligram per day, 6-week study, a randomized, placebo-controlled, very extensively studied, and increased markers of skeletal muscle and with some other minor benefits, because we know that diet, lifestyle, absorption, thyroid, sex hormones, gonadal hormones, and of course the adrenal hormones all play a role as well. So whenever we see a study, and I'm sure you all see the same problem with most of the states, they're not controlling for enough factors. Like, great, this is a great study, but you didn't control for this and this, which are potential positives or negatives that skewed the data one way or the other. And so once again, we kind of want to look at where the scientific literature is, and we vet all of that. And so we see, once again, 1,000 milligrams of niacin, 1,000 milligrams of nicotinamide riboside, and we see the baselines of NAD levels, approximately twofold decrease in muscle NAD level concentrations are found in myopathy patients. I'm doing a large study on muscular dystrophy and Becker's. So Duchenne's muscular dystrophy and Becker's, so muscular dystrophy in general. And we're looking to support myostatin levels and control their mitochondrial function. And I've been very fortunate to work with a young man. His name is Jake in Florida. And I started working with him when he was 11 years old. And we've kept him off steroids. He has Duchenne's muscular dystrophy that occurs from a statistical perspective, 1 in 3,500 men, young boys. And we've actually kept him off steroids. And we actually got him from not even pottying by himself to being able to potty and bathe by himself with just nutritional interventions. Individual results will vary, always a disclaimer. But then we see here niacin reduced whole body fat. So once again, we're supporting the mitochondria. This is just one thing. Of course, CoQ10, pyroquinone, quinone. And we see here also, although NR did not increase skeletal muscle NAD levels, because there's always studies, pro and con, it increased the markers of NAD flux, demonstrates skeletal muscle bioavailability of NR supplementation. And also we see here 1,000 milligrams of NR, 5 months, non-randomized, open label, parallel assignment. And they looked at discordant twins. So if we all looked at a twin, and they'll say they're 30 years old or 40 years old, are they really twins any longer? From a genetic perspective, they are, but epigenetically not. They had different spouses, different significant others. Maybe one had pneumonia. Maybe one had 3 or 4 bouts of antibiotics, so their microbiome is altered. So even though we're looking at discordant twins, the question is, their similarities have changed, even though they're genetically the same people. They're not, in many regards, the same people because of the epigenetic factors. So in our increased muscle mitochondrial biogenesis, and improved gut microbiota. And of course, as the gut goes off, so do we. So from a healthy aging and muscle function perspective, positively associated with NAD abundance. And this one's interesting. The skeletal muscle is greatly affected by aging. We know that. We started our premise on it, plus we're all clinicians. And however, the underlying molecular mechanism and how lack of physical activity is involved in age-related metabolic decline in muscle health in humans, we compared a cross-sectional study, and the muscle metabolome from young to older, and nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, NAD, was one of the most prominent metabolites that was lower in older adults. There is an exception, and this exception caught my attention. For those older adults that are already walking 14,000 steps a day, their NAD levels were really, really good. So, okay, so if you're not walking 14,000 steps, your NAD levels as your age start plummeting. But now the question is, and I'm sure it occurs to you as it does me, well, were their NAD levels somehow biochemically, genetically really, really great, which allowed them to walk those 14,000 steps? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? But once again, NAD is very, very important. And so we look at the lower levels and physiology. And as you can see in the dark green, this work confirms the relationship between NAD levels and overall health status in aging individuals, and highlights NAD pathways as a promising target for healthy aging, along with, of course, a good diet, a good lifestyle, and, you know, put your car and recirculate while you're sitting in traffic so you're not inhaling from the diesel truck in front of you. No pun intended there. My wife said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Recirculate." My poor wife, we were in Las Vegas for my son's 21st birthday. We were going to pick up Tape Mouth, which is a gentleman that tapes his mouth and then acts like a mime. We were going to pick up Penn and Teller, but she ends up the first night having a Charlie horse. We were staying at the Venetian, where I've gone many a time to lecture, and she ends up having a Charlie horse, and I hear this conk, a lark clunk, kind of like a bowling ball falling on a hardwood floor. Well, it was her head bouncing off the marble floor in the bathroom of the Venetian. And then I heard as she was choking on her tongue and suffocating. So I got to be the first responder, opened her airway, dealt with the hypotension. She was cold and clammy and all these things. So she ended up with a brain bleed from bouncing her head, back of her head, off the marble floor. And she had a frontal lobe brain bleed. And we got to spend $69,000 out of pocket because our insurance didn't cover travel in Las Vegas. But she cannot smell. So my wife, as I'm driving along, she says, "What are you doing?" I says, "There's a diesel smell." So she knows when I go to recirculate, I'm picking up a smell of something. Or both her and I have allergies, and since she can no longer have a sense of smell, because what happens is the cribriform plate, which you're very familiar from our neuroanatomy, she actually severed her olfactory nerve along the cribriform plate. Yay, not. So 52 subjects, muscle biopsies, and skeletal muscle, physically impaired, very low NAD levels. Young people doing great, exercise, doing okay, physically active, once again, but then it goes as a slippery slope. So NAD was significantly depleted, and OA, suggesting older adults, that is, NAD declines with age, and sufficient activity can help with the decline. We must exercise, once again, supporting the innate biochemical pathways and redundancies that are built into our body. So where we don't want to be. And then we look here at overweight, undertrained individuals, 16 males, 10 adults, and then we see what happens, and we see the changes in their chemistry as a result of that. And so we see changes in restoring NAD levels and NADH concentrations observed in recreationally trained college athletes, muscle citrate synthase, markers of mitochondrial density, and we see these other changes. So we see the same thing here. The 22 weight discordant individuals, twins, because this was all the studies I showed you earlier on that one slide, 250 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams daily for 5 months, escalating dose, no exercise intervention. And we're seeing lean and obese twins responded similarly to NR. NR increased whole blood levels of NAD by 2.3-fold. And we start seeing other changes as well. And so the limitation is no control. That was the limitation of the study. There was no control. And so it'd be nice to have a control. And we're trying to find twins to participate in the study. It's a little hard to find the subject matter. NR improved the mitochondrial biogenesis as well, and increase the number of mitochondria in the muscle, which of course helps with the thermogenesis, the browning of the tissues around as well. So, and NR increased mitochondrial transcription factors in the muscle. And then we look at mitochondrial support. This is my protocol for my patients, which I'm trying to optimize their weight loss experience. I use an NAD precursor, my preference, NR, CoQ10, PQQ, and resveratrol. consume sufficient calories to prevent increase in the increased T3 to reverse T3 conversion. The moment we go on starvation, your body doesn't know we're doing it with intent. It's still thinking ancestrally, there's not enough food. I'm going to go into hibernation mode. And starvation, inflammation, and injury all increase conversion to reverse T3. So going too quickly, too hard on weight loss, like GLP-1 often does. I have a gentleman now, he's just turned 60, he's just a couple of months older than me, and he's lost so much weight, he's scared, and he's had not stopped the GLP-1, he's not my patient, and that he's actually swimming in his outfits. It's like, okay, that's too much weight loss, dude. And sufficient protein and essential amino acids with anabolic resistance. It looks like the branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, are very important, but leucine particularly are very prevalent, insufficiency of leucine. So when you have a patient that has anabolic resistance, where their muscles aren't taking up the amino acids, you want to make sure their leucine and branched chains are dialed in. Exercise, corticotropin, that's an egg-based product, which we can talk about after our official talk here. We want to mitigate anabolic resistance by inhibiting myostatin, and we want to support detoxification. And I am very dramatic on this one. The word diet has the word die in it. And I've sadly enough had more than one patient over my 33 years that have lost massive amounts of weight, not always under my watch, and shortly thereafter they end with cancer. And because they've liberated toxins and chemicals they couldn't handle. Coincidental causation, correlation, don't know. But it's like it's hormonally based cancers usually. So they were thin, but then they're battling for their lives. Coincidental, like I said, don't know. This is a little graphic that I've created. I can send you the larger version of it about phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. As we know, phase 1 toxins are very toxic. But then we go into that intermediary phase between phase 1 and phase 2, and it's actually more reactive and more damaging. So once we get the hot potato moving, we need to keep it going and make sure we're got our gallbladder, our kidneys, and of course our skin. So this is where sauna and all these things come into play as well. But we have to support all those pathways. We have to ensure good quality sleep and rule out sleep apnea. I can't share how many patients I have. And right now I have a patient with polycystic kidney disease. His younger brother, he's my patient 63, his younger brother at 45 actually had double kidney transplant, has now rejected them and is waiting for on the donor list, and he's on dialysis. His father, of my patient that is, actually ended up passing away from polycystic kidney disease. And now he's in stage 5 kidney failure, my patient. And we found out he had apnea. He only weighs 145 pounds. He is in great shape and exercises all the time. And I've told him over the years, I think you have apnea. He said, no, I'm skinny. I'm not fat. I'm not. And lo and behold, that lower oxygen level. So we have hypoxia and then we have hypoxemia. So you wonder, okay, well, that kidney's not doing so well to start with, largely cystic, polycystic kidney disease. And he's creating a hypoxic and hypoxemia environment around that kidney. And so I just had a conversation today. It's like, let's take care of the kidney so we can maybe wait on having to do too much dialysis. He's going to start with paracentesis, fluid in the belly and then pull it out. But then, he wants to avoid being stuck on the machine. But the thing is, we have to take care of those kidneys with oxygen. So the other thing is with weight loss, of course, HbA1c, dysregulated cortisol levels. I like to do a 4-time salivary cortisol, or if you like to do something like a urinary test, there's of course a urinary test out there that's actually located in Oregon that does a urinary 4-time cortisol. DHEA, total and free testosterone for men and women, growth hormone, IGF-1 at the very least, and every one of these thyroids, and of course, sometimes I'll do antibodies as well. That's my minimum protocol for my patients. Now, when it comes to NAD levels, because we've talked quite a bit about it, if you get a virus, your NAD levels will drop. There's a ex vivo study showing that within 25 hours of herpes virus, it drops virtually to nil. I mean, very dramatic drop. Overtraining, yes, you can do too much of a good thing. Sun exposure, and that's kind of an interesting one because remember, you go to your dermatologist, and my dermatologist, Marla Klein, which actually, strange enough, I was in Bahamas on a Disney cruise with my kids 15 years ago, and I said, it's Marla. And Kathy says, who's Marla? I said, she's my dermatologist, but she has a brochure. Take your niacin. Okay, well, NAD is built from niacin and niacinamide. Interesting. So that sun exposure kind of makes sense. Overnutrition, overfed, undernourished. sedentary lifestyle, and of course, environmental factors, all big contributing factors. So the question is, how low are we on NAD? There's actually a test. You probably know there's a test. There's a test to measure NAD levels on your patients, and or you can just assume that they're low. But are we at 1%? Like our basically certain apps on my phone don't work at less than 10%. Are we at 20%? The question is, are we underdosed and have we got the person's titrated up to an optimal level of NAD? Where there's actually an NAD test, simple finger prick test that can measure NAD levels and say, are we dialed in and should we really focus the energy and time for our patients on dealing with that? And so once again, if we look at the ATP pathways, we look at food, carbs, fats, proteins, multiple NAD steps to make ATP. And an interesting piece of trivia. When we were 30 years old, and some of you are 30, enjoy the moment. I wish I had enjoyed my 30s more and I didn't work 80 hours a week. But you are making, on average, 60 kilograms, about 130 pounds of ATP per day at 30. Thank goodness we're great recyclers, and that's not weight that we keep around every day. But you make it 130 pounds per day. And for every decade from the age of 30 on, you make about 10% less ATP. So I'm at 60. So I'm making 30% less ATP than when I was younger. And does that impact my cellular function? And I often will hold up my cell phone for my patients, show them one of my generic app pages, and say, all these apps on my phone are like the DNA in the cells, the eye, the brain, the hair, the heart, the lungs, the GI tract, the paracrine, the exocrine function of the pancreas and gallbladder. But now if I don't have enough charge on my phone, I have $1,000 glorified cell phone, which is like a human cell without enough energy. So I'm going to open up for questions. I'm long-winded. I apologize, but here I am. Fire away.
Wow. Where to start? Okay, so you went through the your sort of your little your protocol there. What specifically are you measuring for to say yes, I need NAD, or what about NMN also?
Okay, so NMN, as this graphic shows up here, does not cross over the cellular membrane. It must be broken down. It's too large a molecule.
Mm-hmm.
Just like NAD is too large a molecule. So if you're doing IV NAD, there's benefits of IV NAD. And actually, I need to scroll up a little further. But NAD has to also be broken down to cross the cellular membrane. So that's our challenge here. Is NMN, yeah, clearly it's a precursor molecule.
That can be overcome if you load them with cyclodextrin. That's the new trend for all the big molecules. You have problem of getting inside the cells. You can bypass the regular transporter, the shuttles, and you can use cyclodextrin for endocytosis, and you can get as you want inside the cells.
Great tidbit. I was unaware of that. But under the natural physiological state, NMN doesn't do it as well. Maybe with cyclodextrin it does. I stay humble, and thank you for educating me. Now I'm going to write that down. And guess what? Before my wife's going to say, "What are you doing for the rest of the evening?" I'm looking at cyclodextrin. In fact, I'm writing it down right now. Thank you, Doc.
Yeah, I can help you. Can we take off the recording so we can talk about openly? Is that